So what the next command is the destroy command. So this allows us to destroy an instance or delete an instance uh, from this file storage. So we are going to add a new method called do destroy. Then we pass in the arg. So how do we call this method or this command? When you call something like destroy, then the name of the class, for example, base model, then you pass in the ID. Um, this will delete the item from the file storage. So what we can do is to say we can load the files or we can load all the items. So for object, you can say, for example, uh, one ways could be to find the object. So for we can, let's say, object equals storage all. So the idea here is, let's say, to delete an ID from the storage object. A possible way would be to say storage dot all. Then dictionaries they have a method called pop. So the pop method receives the key of the item, and also we have to determine which class it is about. As usual, what I propose would be to say class name, then we have the object ID or split. That way we know which class we want to access and what should be its ID. And next, what is going to happen? We get the list of all the objects. So object list equal storage dot all. Then we get the values from the dictionary. Then the next thing will be new object list. Uh, it is not possible like that. So what I propose would be to first find out if the object exists. So that will be um, object in storage all, then values. Then we find the class if it exists. So if class name equal object underscore underscore class name underscore underscore name is different than class name, then we continue as usual. So this is one way of doing it, but there are for sure other ways. So if object ID is different than object ID, then we need to continue again. But if we find an object, we are going to break the loop. So I'm going to say found equal object, then break the loop. So this variable found, we are going to define it here. Then we type in an if statement. If found is none, that means we weren't able to find the instance. So we are going to print an error message, instance not found. For example, that could be an error message. Then we return. Now it's time to delete this object from our storage class. And one ways of doing that would be to say storage.all. Then since it's the returned object is a dictionary, we can call the pop method. Then we pass in the key we want to delete from the dictionary. So the key would be the ID of the object. Then we pass in none. So the pop function receives the key to delete from the dictionary, then none. If the key doesn't exist, it will return none. Then we update our storage. So by calling storage.save, we can open the JSON file on the right pane to the right side. So we can see that we have all these objects. What if you want to delete this user object right here? I'm going to open the terminal, then start the console again. So what you can have is destroy user. Then we are going to pass in the ID of this user. We're going to pass in like that. Then let's see what's going to happen in the JSON file. So the user with the ID is 5, 4 till has been deleted. Also, if you want, you can delete this object from our file storage. It is of type base model, so we're gonna say destroy base model. Let's type it here, destroy base model. Then we type in the ID. So when you type that, the base model with the specified ID disappeared from our JSON file. Someone want to speak? Yes, Emmanuel.
Yes, good afternoon, Travel.
Good afternoon.
Yes, please, I want to ask, we didn't actually import anything concerning JSON file in this program. How is it dynamically affecting the JSON file?
Yes, it is. I'm going to explain from here. Let's say when you have we defined a class named, let's say I'm going to close all these. So the first thing is we defined a, a class named file storage. So the file storage is the one that interact with the file system, and it contains attribute that allows us to um, keep or record the list of objects we have in our application. So when you call, where is the method? So when you call the save method on the file storage, it will take all the dictionary, all the objects registered, then open the file, then add them to the specified file as JSON. Now the trick is we created an instance of a file storage in the underscore unit underscore file, which is the package initialization file. So whenever the program starts, we have a single instance of a file storage class. So what happens when you call the storage.save method? It will just take this object dictionary, then dump it into the file. So if you delete something from this object dictionary, the new content will be dumped to the file. This is the reason why the data JSON file is being modified whenever you type in storage.save. So we took advantage of that in our console application. Let's move here. So we deleted something from the dictionary, then we call the story.save. So what's going to happen? The story.save method will take the updated dictionary, then dump it into the JSON file. So it will um, add the new, let's say, update it with the new content. So this is how this file is getting modified. Is there something still to clarify? Uh, okay, so now we can move on the next section. The next section is, let's say, the update command. So this allows us to update, let's say, an attribute on an object. So how do we make the update? So always we start by defining the do update method. So that will be do update, then self org. And what happens, how to call this method, we say update, then the name of the class name, then the ID, then after we specify the attribute name, for example, attribute name, then attribute new value. What we can see that this command has 1, 2, 3, 4 components. So we have to find a way to extract each of these. Now let's start by specifying what would be the arg port of this. So the argument parameter will have a value like that. So it will be class name, then the ID, then we have the attribute name, then the attribute new value. Okay, so we can type in class name, then we can say um, object ID, then attribute name, then attribute new value equal or split with space as a separator. So that ways we have the class name, the object, the attribute name, the attribute new value will be stored in those variables. So before we continue, what I want to show is just to print those values. So this is the class name. Then we print the object ID. Then we print the attribute name. Then also we can print the attribute new value. Now I'm going to open the terminal and close those other files. Now let's open the start the console. So when you type in update, for example, user, then you type in some IDs. For now, we don't have any ID, but I'm going to look into the JSON file. So in the JSON file, we have a user with this ID. I'm going to copy it. Then let's type in update user with this ID. Then we can type in something, name. Then we can say Muhammad Ali. So when you type in enter, it says too many values to unpack. So there is a problem. It's time to check what is going wrong. So maybe it's because of this space, the space in the name here. So I'm going to clear the console and start it again. So let's type in again, update user, then the ID, then the new attribute value, so the attribute name, then we pass in Ali. So what we can see is that we have the attributes displaying. So user, the ID, the attribute, then the attribute value. So we need to find out which object this ID represents, then update its attribute. So what I'm going to suggest is that any other values after the attribute name is going to be considered, um, let's say, part of the attribute value. But for now, we're not going to handle that. What we are sure about is just we have the class name, which is, I'm going to say, params equal args splits, then class name equal param 0 class name, then we have object ID equal params 1, attribute name equal param 2, and attribute new value equal, let's say, we're going to say param, then starting from 2 till the end, then we join that. We say join with a space, and that will take care of the rest. So we can now pass in something like Muhammad Ali or any other values after the parameter name. I'm going to close the console, then start it again. So when you type in update user, date user, then the ID, then the name, then you can type in something um, Muhammad Ali. Um, yeah, the file wasn't saved. I'm going to save the file. Sorry for that. Now update user, then the ID of the user, the name, then I'm going to type in Muhammad Ali. str object has no attribute param. Yes, there is an error on this line. We should type in dot join, then passing in the resulting lists. So let's clear the console and the terminal and start it again. Update user, then we type in the ID, the name, then Muhammad Ali. So here you can see that we have user, then we have the ID, the name, then also Muhammad Ali. So for sure, we don't need those codes around our, let's say, string. We need to find a way to delete those codes when they are present. But for now, we're not going to handle this. Let's continue with the session. So we know the class name, the object ID, the attribute name, and the attribute new value. It's time to look for the object. So I'm going to define a variable named found, which represents the object when we find it in the storage list. So I'm going to type in object for object in storage all, then values. It is the same if statement I'm going to type in. So let's just copy the previous one and pass it in here. So if we found the object, the found variable will be set to the object. Then if, or we don't even need to add this found variable or break the loop. We can just say, um, yes, we can add that like that because we want to add some error checking. So if found is not none, we can say found set attribute on the found object, then we pass in the attribute name, then we pass in the attribute new value. So we are going to, let's say, replace all the double quotes with single quotes in the attribute new value. So that ways we won't have to deal with them later. Old with empty string. Okay. So if the object is found, we set the attribute name with the attribute value, but we also have to make sure um, to replace the attribute, let's say, to replace the double quotes. So what I propose would be I'm going to replace the double quote in all um, just from the start. I think that is much simpler. So replace double quotes with empty string. So whenever there is a double quote, we're going to replace it with an empty string. And then here we have a much simpler code. Else, the else statement, else print instance not found. This could be an error message. So once we set the attribute on the object, we can then call the storage.save method, or even we can just call found.save because this is an object that has the save method. Under the hood, this method will call the storage.save. So our JSON file will get updated.